Hi friends, are you a fan or are you a follower? And by fan I mean like a fair weather fan or like a true follower. I ask this question just in general, like with our sports. Is there a team where you're a fan, but if things start going south and they lose several games, you at best lose interest in them. At worst, you just kind of write them off and think, this team, bunch of losers, right? That's a fair weather fan. But a follower is no matter what, right? Like Cleveland Browns fans. I mean, if you're a Cleveland Browns fan who stays with them, then you're truly our follower, right? Because you go through and have gone through a lot of really disappointing seasons, but you stay with them through thick and thin. Okay, well, I think that analogy and the question that comes with it can be applied to our Christian faith and to Jesus Christ in particular. Are you a fan of Jesus, like a fair weather fan, or are you a true follower, like a disciple? When things of life get in the way of you following your faith in Jesus Christ, do you move Jesus out of the way, or do you move those things out of the way? When your faith is inconvenient for you and you wanting what you want in this life, do you move the thing that is inconvenient for you, faith, or do you let go of the stuff that is in contradiction to your faith? That will prove whether or not you're a fair weather fan or whether you're a follower. That you're going to stick with Christ through thick and thin. You're a disciple of Jesus Christ, and you're going to follow him very closely. I ask this question because perhaps one of the reasons why there are some in our society today who are departing the Christian faith is that they're more fan than they are follower. Their departure isn't just then affecting them, if you think about it. It is disinspiring countless other people, like first and foremost their children or other family members or other people, because they can still call themselves Christians, as often many people today in our secular society do. They still call themselves Christians. They still call themselves Catholics, but they don't follow the Lord, not in everyday living. They're not going to Mass. They're not praying every day. They're not really making efforts to get to know God more and to grow more in God. They're not following the values and the principles of our faith in regards to their lifestyle choices, their relationships with others. And guess what? People are watching them. People are watching you. And when they see that, we're more fair weather fan than we are following, they're thinking to themselves, if this is what following God is like, I don't need it. And they don't do it. And then, of course, we as parents become very sad that we've spent so much time sending our kids to a Catholic school or taking them through PSR and going to Mass maybe even, but in the rest of our 167 hours of the week, we're not really following Christ. And so our kids depart the practice of the faith and we're heartbroken. So what to do with that? Why is Christianity fading in our world, in some people's hearts, in some families, and some marriages, whereas for most of the whole history of Christianity, up until about the middle of the 20th century, it was growing. Like, how does it go from non-stop growth to like a full stop in just a matter of a few decades? Something has gone wrong. What is that? Well, I think that we can get our answer from the cross. From the cross. Let me say this. In Jesus' world, the cross was not something we hung around our necks and we made it a nice piece of jewelry, right? No. The cross wasn't something that we ran to. It was something that we ran from. In the Roman world, and maybe you know this, the cross was an instrument of torture. It was one of the worst instruments of torture. And many people died upon the cross throughout the Roman world. Not just Jesus and the two thieves died upon the cross when he was crucified, but just about 40 years later, when the Jewish citizens of Jerusalem rose up in revolt against Rome itself. Rome sent its troops in, and historians tell us that over the course of putting down that revolt, close to 5,000 Jews were crucified every day. The Romans literally deforest all the forest around Jerusalem and beyond in order to build crosses to put the Jews on. Up to 1 million Jews were crucified during that revolt. So it was the Romans' go-to instrument for those who they saw as enemies against the empire, or for hard, fast criminals. That was the cross. And yet, I tell you this because what is just absolutely incredible is that when Peter and Paul and the other apostles and then the early generations of Christians went out into the Roman world, literally using the Roman roads that Rome had built to connect all parts of the empire. When they went into all these lands that the Romans occupied, to go and tell people to follow Jesus Christ, to evangelize them, to call them to become followers of Jesus Christ, they preach Christ crucified. Like, what? I mean, can you imagine that? Just think of yourself in first century Christianity, right? A few years, a few decades after the death of Jesus Christ. All the Roman world is pagan. None of them have heard of Christianity or Jesus Christ. And these groups of disciples are going around and they're coming to you and they're saying, hey, we've got the God, right? Yeah. The Roman gods, they don't even exist. There's one true God, and it's the God of Jesus Christ. Oh, tell us more about Jesus Christ. Well, he was a man that the Romans crucified, and he died upon the cross. Yeah, come follow us now. And the people are going to like, what? I'm not going to follow you. Following a God who was crucified by the Romans. We're not doing that. And yet, what we know from history is that Christianity grew like wildfire in the Roman Empire. First starting with the apostles, the first evangelists, and then their disciples, and then the generation after that, the disciples, and going on from there. For the first 500 years of the church overcame the Roman Empire, and every part of the Roman Empire was Christianized by the time the Roman Empire collapsed, right? And they preached Christ crucified. Meaning, let me just draw this out for you just for a second. What this means is this, is that the people who were following Christ, they were following him because they were inviting Jesus into their lives as they themselves were experiencing persecution for being Christian. They would have their homes confiscated. They would have their jobs taken away. They would be tortured, beaten, scourged, or put upon a cross, or their entire families put to death. And what they were doing is that they just didn't know about Christ crucified, because Christ crucified in the Roman world didn't make sense. They were having experiences of Christ crucified, coming alongside of them as they were suffering and giving meaning to their suffering and hope for their suffering, and beyond their suffering and their persecution, the promise of eternal life. But it didn't stop with Christ crucified either, because they are also experiencing Christ resurrected. And not just their own resurrections at the, meaning that the Lord rescued them from death and brought them into heaven, but all the small and big resurrections that come in our lives when we know defeat, when we know loss, when we know hurt, when we know betrayal, when we know persecutions and hardships and trials in our lives. That Christ resurrected comes alongside of them and gives them hope and gives them strength and gives them vision and gives them the stuff of life that they need, not only to get through this life or get through that experience, to become stronger and even to give them peace and joy and purpose in their life. So this was the stuff that was not only converting Christians, but this was the stuff that helped them get through the hardships of life. And this is the stuff that got them stronger and stronger, so that as in the first 5 centuries of the church, they're facing all these hardships from the Roman citizens. And let me be clear about this. Sometimes those Roman citizens were their spouses, was their children turning them in, or their parents turning them in to the local magistrate, or the local Roman guards, soldiers. Sometimes these were neighbors. Sometimes these were lifelong friends that were turning them in. And when they faced the hardships of life, as they faced them, everyone else around them was watching them. Their mothers, their husbands, their wives, their fathers, their grandparents, their children, their cousins, their classmates, their co-workers, the people in the market and the open public squares. They were watching them. They were watching them face all this with deep conviction and meaning and strength. And this is the stuff that convicted their hearts and changed the lives of the spectators around them and started to move in them and say, what they have, I don't have. What beautiful thing they have, I don't have. As I'm wrapped up in worries and anxieties and fears and depression and a sense of meaningless and hopelessness, as I'm wrapped up in all of the materialism of this world or the politics of my age, I don't have what they have. And so their witness is the stuff that fanned the flame of the fire of Christianity. And that was the case then beyond the Roman world, as Christians then met every people that eventually settled down and became nations, and they Christianized and evangelized and built their entire cultures based upon this witness. Up until about 60 years ago. And the reason why Christianity is not being passed from generation to generation in our homes, in our families, in our schools, in our boyfriend and girlfriend relationships, in our spousal relationships, in our parishes even, and in our culture in general, is that we are no longer witnessing to the value of being in a relationship with Jesus Christ. We might have some of the head knowledge of the faith, of the fact that Jesus was crucified. We might wear a crucifix around our neck, and we might believe in the resurrection, but we're not allowing ourselves to have experiences of Christ crucified. I'm not running away from suffering, but in the midst of suffering, running to Christ. Instead of trying to placate all the hardships of our lives with all kinds of things that numb us and dull us and distract us and entertain us. And we're not giving ourselves experiences of the resurrected Lord. So that as we go through the defeats and victories of life, we're witnessing this to our children and to everyone else. And they're seeing our faith on fire despite the hardships in our lives and despite the successes of our lives when we often forget God the most. But here's the good news. I mean, I've been a priest for 25 years. I see individuals and marriages and families and parishes and even schools that see this now. Like the sleeping giant is waking up. That is the universal global church. It's not happening everywhere, but it's beginning to happen in the hearts of many people. And I have seen entire families come on fire with the love of Jesus Christ. I've seen marriages transformed. I've seen young people come to Christ and inspire their own parents to come back to the practice of faith. I've seen parents who were laissez-faire and mediocre at best in the practice of faith, sitting in pews all their life, but the rest of their week not really taking to the faith. And then as adults, coming on board with their faith, and their entire adult children, 4, 5, 6 children, coming back to the faith because of the conviction of their older parents living out their faith. I've seen it. Anecdotally, I've seen it in every parish I've been in. So that is the good news, brothers and sisters. But it comes back to how Christianity grew like wildfire and spread to every nation, language, and culture and people in this world. And that is, it is living Christ crucified and living him resurrected with all the joy and the peace and the happiness and purpose that comes with both. Because people are watching us. The people who are closest to us, the people that we want the most to be happy, they're watching us. And if we're watching Christ as we go through the ups and downs of Christ, of life, and following him, then the very things that we want for ourselves in this world and we want for them, let alone the world to come, will happen. But it's not without the cross, and it's not without the resurrection. Right? Because that is Christianity. Not just preaching, but living, and not just knowing, but experiencing and witnessing Christ crucified and Christ resurrected. Until next time.